My name is Megan Foster. I'm 32 years old. And what I'm about to share isn't just a story about sleeping on a couch. It's about the moment I realized I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a life that was never truly mine. The night I booked a $2,800 hotel suite wasn't about luxury or impulse. It was about reclaiming something that had been slowly taken from me, my worth. I used to think that being quiet, agreeable, and accommodating was the path to peace. But the truth is, sometimes people will keep you small just so they can feel big. And in my case, that person was the one I trusted the most. My husband, Ryan. When people look at us from the outside, they assume we have it all. We live in a modest but beautiful house on the west side of Erie, near the lake. He's a corporate financial advisor, and I run a boutique event planning service. We host elegant dinners, have mutual friends, take the occasional beach vacation. On paper, we look like the perfect couple. But people rarely see what happens behind closed doors. Our marriage hadn't always been like this. In the beginning, he was attentive, maybe even too attentive. He complimented everything I wore, brought me coffee in bed, texted me just to say he missed me, and I drank in every drop of it, believing I had finally found the kind of love people only write about. Before I go any deeper into this story, I want to know who you are. Drop your name and where you're listening from in the comments, because this story isn't just mine, it could be yours too. What I'm about to share is real, raw, and not easy to hear. But if you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, or doubted your own worth in someone else's shadow, then I hope my voice gives you the strength to find your own. Every single detail in this story actually happened. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why one night on the couch changed everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're ready to hear how I turned pain into power. But love, as I learned, can have many disguises. What felt like care eventually turned into control. First, it was about small things. Him helping me choose outfits because he just wanted me to look my best. Then it became comments about my clients. He thought some were too demanding and said I should drop them, even if they brought in the most money. Slowly, he chipped away at my independence, always cloaked in this soft, manipulative charm. I brushed off the signs. I wanted to believe he was just stressed or protective, or maybe he just needed to feel involved. But last month, something shifted. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't confusing. It was loud, clear, and humiliating. It was a Friday night. We had invited a few couples over for dinner, casual friends from Ryan's job and a woman named Holly, who had recently joined my team. I'd been mentoring her and wanted to include her more in our social circle. The evening started fine. We were sipping wine, passing around bruschetta, and everything felt light. But I could tell Ryan was already irritated. I had forgotten to chill his favorite white wine, and I hadn't worn the dress he suggested earlier that day. At one point, he leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You look tired. Maybe go touch up before dessert." I forced a smile, excused myself, and locked myself in the downstairs bathroom. My reflection stared back at me. Not angry, not sad, just numb. I applied a fresh layer of lipstick and returned, pretending nothing had happened. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I was cleaning up alone. Ryan was on the couch watching some political debate, a scowl etched on his face. I didn't expect gratitude, but what came next broke something in me. "You could have tried harder tonight," he said, not looking at me. "You embarrassed me. Holly was more charming than you. Maybe next time, she should host." I didn't reply. I just kept stacking dishes, my hands trembling slightly. When I finally finished and walked into the living room, he didn't even turn to face me. He just said, "Don't bother coming to bed. I need space. Sleep on the couch." That sentence, so cold, so commanding, didn't even register right away. I thought he was joking. We'd had arguments before, but never like this. When I didn't move, he finally looked at me and added, "You're not listening. Couch, now." I stood there for a full minute. Then I turned around, walked upstairs, packed a single weekender bag, and left. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even close the door quietly. I walked out like I was walking out of a burning building, because in many ways, I was. I got in my car, parked just around the corner, and sat in silence. It was past midnight. I could have driven to my sister's place in Pittsburgh or called Holly and asked to crash for the night, but something inside me shifted, a sudden, undeniable refusal to feel small for one more minute. That's when I remembered a hotel I had once helped organize an event for, the Whitmore Grand, one of the most luxurious boutique hotels in the state, nestled just outside Erie, overlooking the lake. It had a penthouse suite so extravagant, it was usually reserved for celebrities or political donors. And I remembered the price too, $2,800 per night, all-inclusive, private chef, spa access, panoramic view. I opened my phone, searched the website. One suite available. I hesitated for exactly 8 seconds. Then I booked it. It felt reckless. It felt wild. It felt free. As I pulled into the valet drive 25 minutes later, wearing jeans and a coat that didn't match, I could feel the valet's confusion. I smiled and handed over my keys without a word. I walked through the gleaming glass doors with confidence I hadn't felt in years. The check-in woman was polite, but visibly skeptical. Still, she typed in my name, glanced at the reservation, and said, "Right this way, Miss Foster." The elevator to the penthouse was private. I rode it alone, watching the floor count climb higher than I thought buildings even went in Erie. And when the doors opened, I stepped into a world I didn't recognize. Velvet armchairs, a marble fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the sleeping city and the lake beyond, dark and endless. I kicked off my shoes, let my bag fall to the floor, walked barefoot to the balcony, and just breathed. That night I didn't sleep much, but not because of stress or sadness. I walked through every room, touched every surface, ordered midnight risotto, stood in the walk-in rain shower until the hot water ran out. I wasn't mourning my marriage, I was rediscovering myself. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I felt like I had control, since I felt worthy of luxury, of space, of silence, of not having to justify every decision. I wasn't booking a suite to prove a point. I was booking it because I deserved not to sleep on the couch, literally or metaphorically. And maybe that's when the idea of revenge was born. Not the petty kind. Not yelling or cheating or throwing his clothes out the window. No. The best kind of revenge is the one that makes people wonder how they ever thought they could underestimate you. That night was just the beginning. The next morning, sunlight poured through the towering windows, casting golden lines across the plush ivory rug beneath my feet. I had barely slept, but felt more awake than I had in years. I stood in front of the glass, coffee in hand, watching the quiet lake ripple in the distance. Erie had never looked so different, so peaceful, from above. Down there was the world I had been living in, a place of rules, of walking on eggshells, of constantly managing someone else's mood. Up here, it was just me. And for the first time in a long while, I liked being alone with myself. By 10 o'clock, I had already made a list. Not a revenge plan exactly, not yet, but a list of truths. Things I had ignored, things I had excused, little humiliations I had labeled as normal or not worth the fight. I scrolled through my photos and saw the evolution of my silence. Pictures where I was smiling, but my eyes weren't. Holidays where I wore the dress Ryan picked, stood where he told me, and laughed when I didn't want to. I noticed how, over time, I had vanished from my own life. Around noon, I called Holly. She answered quickly, clearly surprised. "Hey, is everything okay?" I hesitated. Then I said, "I left." There was a pause. "You mean, for good?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going back today. I'm at the Whitmore." "The what? Wait, the Whitmore? Megan, what happened?" I could hear the concern in her voice, but I also heard something else. Relief, validation, as if she had seen the signs but never felt it was her place to say anything. I told her about the dinner, the comment, the couch, and then I said it out loud for the first time. "I think he's been emotionally abusive for years." Holly didn't try to argue. She just said, "I'm proud of you." After we hung up, I felt something unlock. Naming it made it real. It wasn't about a single night or a single argument. It was a pattern, one that I had tolerated, rationalized, and even protected. But now I wasn't just a victim in the story. I was rewriting it. Ryan didn't text me until late that evening. The message was short. "Where are you? I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying, "Not at home." He waited another hour to respond. Then came, "You're being dramatic. Come back." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just control in a new form, the kind that pretends nothing happened and demands you do the same. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. I put my phone down and returned to my wine, my robe, and the fireplace. Let him stew. By the third day, something had shifted in me entirely. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't even reacting. I was observing, watching the way he spun narratives in his texts. How he went from blaming me to ignoring me to suddenly sending "miss you" messages like everything had been resolved by my silence. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I started making copies of everything I needed. Bank statements, shared accounts, insurance documents. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt powerful. I wasn't sure yet whether I'd leave permanently, but if I did, I wouldn't leave empty-handed. And then something unexpected happened. I received an email from a past client, Lisa Matthews, asking if I was available for a last-minute event. She'd been referred again through a friend and remembered how well I had handled her sister's wedding. She said she needed someone for a charity gala, high budget, 2 weeks out, full creative control. I hesitated. My schedule had been on hold because Ryan always needed me home more than he supported my work. But this could be my re-entry. I told her I'd take it. I started planning immediately. Holly offered to assist, and I threw myself into it like a woman building her own foundation brick by brick. That same night, Ryan called. I didn't answer. Then he left a voicemail. "Megan, I don't know what this is. You've made your point. Come home. Let's talk like adults." Like adults. As if I hadn't tried that for years. The next day, he showed up at the Whitmore. I saw him through the lobby glass before he saw me. He was wearing one of his pressed blazers, trying to look composed, but I could tell he was unraveling. I had left the front desk a note not to send anyone up, so they politely turned him away. He tried again, called me 6 times, texted, "Why are you humiliating me like this?" That word, humiliating. It wasn't about me. It was about his image. And for the first time, I didn't feel scared of him. I felt stronger. Later that night, I wrote him a message. Not a response to his guilt trips. Not a plea. Just facts. "I've been thinking about how often I've prioritized your comfort over my peace. How many times I've excused your moods, your demands, your manipulation, and called it compromise. I didn't leave to punish you. I left to remember who I am. If you want to have a real conversation, it'll be on my terms. Until then, don't contact me again." I sent it. Blocked him. Sat down on the massive sofa and stared into the flames. That week passed in a blur of planning, rediscovery, and reflection. Every day felt like peeling off another layer of the identity I had worn just to be acceptable in his world. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was awakening. And with every decision I made, I started imagining a life beyond the one I had settled for. But then Holly called. Voice urgent. "You're not going to believe this. Ryan was at a bar last night. I only know because Jenna, you remember her, from the fundraiser? She saw him with a woman, holding hands, being close." I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had already started grieving that marriage long before I walked out the door. This only confirmed it. What did shock me was what came next. "He said you were unstable," Holly added carefully. "That you stormed out after a small fight and maxed out his credit card on the hotel out of spite." That's when it hit me. He wasn't just spinning a story. He was trying to erase the truth, to rewrite the version where he was still the victim. That's when the seed of revenge really took root. Not by screaming, not by confrontation, but by carefully dismantling the image he had crafted of himself, one piece at a time. I started writing. Everything. Every moment. Every gaslight. Every manipulation. I compiled emails, text screenshots, calendar notes, even small recordings I had saved by accident. And I wasn't alone. Turns out, others had stories too. Holly, an old assistant of his, even Jenna, all women he had tried to make small in different ways. What began as a quiet rebellion was evolving into something far greater. This wasn't just about a couch anymore. It was about exposing a man who had spent years sitting on a throne built out of silence. and who had no idea that the very woman he pushed to the sidelines would be the one to bring the whole thing down. And it would all start with that gala, the one where everyone from his circle would be present, and where I would be the one holding the mic. 2 weeks passed in a haze of strategy, late-night planning sessions, and quiet, calculated preparation. I didn't waste a second. Every minute was poured into making the charity gala unforgettable, not just for the sake of my career, but for something deeper. I had a vision now, not only of the event, but of what it symbolized. I wasn't just organizing flowers and music. I was reclaiming the room, the attention, the voice I had given up for years. And I had chosen the perfect setting to do it. The grand ballroom at the Whitmore. Same place Ryan had once said was too much for me to handle. This time, it would be all mine. The morning of the event, the air buzzed with anticipation. White-gloved staff moved like clockwork, arranging crystal stemware and placing gold-trimmed menus on every table. The theme was, "The Power of One," a message I chose intentionally. It was about how one person could create change, in their community, in their life, and yes, even in the face of those who doubted them. I walked the room one last time, adjusting details, ignoring the tremor in my hands. It wasn't nerves. It was power building in my chest like a storm. I wore a tailored black jumpsuit, bold and clean, with red heels that clicked like punctuation across the marble floor. My hair swept up, lips matte, presence commanding. Holly stood by my side, clipboard in hand, looking at me like she barely recognized the woman beside her. "You're glowing," she whispered. "Revenge looks good on me," I replied, and she laughed, the first light sound of the day. Guests began to arrive at 7. Local officials, philanthropists, former clients, influencers, and, as expected, members of Ryan's circle, people he'd once impressed with his charm, who had no idea how calculated it all was behind the scenes. I caught glimpses of them across the ballroom, the tight-lipped smiles, the hushed gossip. They hadn't seen me in weeks. Whispers trailed me like perfume. I welcomed it. And then he arrived. Ryan walked in like he still owned every room he entered, hand in his pocket, blazer pressed, a beautiful woman at his side, not someone I recognized. Tall, tan, half-smile polished. She clung to his arm a little too tightly, the way I once did when I thought being beside him meant I mattered. He saw me before I saw him, of that I'm sure, but he didn't approach, just nodded, as if acknowledging an employee. That was his first mistake. The second came 20 minutes later, when he stepped up to speak with one of the sponsors, a man I had met at a previous event. Ryan leaned in, casually making conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the rhythm. It was the same script he always used to insert himself into the center of things. I smiled. Let him have his moment. He had no idea what was coming. At 8:30 sharp, I took the stage. The room dimmed. A spotlight glowed softly behind me as I approached the mic. For a second, silence settled, the kind that holds its breath, and then I began. "Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for being here tonight. This event was designed to celebrate impact, not just of institutions or programs, but of individuals, of the choices we make, the lines we draw, the truths we decide to speak, even when they cost us something." I looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some confused, Ryan's frozen. "There was a time," I continued, "when I believed that silence was strength, that being agreeable was noble, that keeping the peace was more important than protecting my own spirit. But tonight, I want to honor those who have learned, sometimes painfully, that strength is not silence. It is the courage to speak when your voice shakes." A soft murmur moved through the room. Ryan's hand tightened around his glass. "Every detail of this evening," I said, "from the theme to the venue, was intentional. This ballroom? I was once told I wasn't capable of managing something this grand, that I should stick to what I'm good at, like floral arrangements or seating charts. But I knew even then, that wasn't about my skill. It was about control." People shifted in their seats. Some glanced at Ryan. "Many of you know me as an event planner. Some of you know me as a friend. Fewer of you know that for the last 5 years, I have been married to someone who used manipulation as a tool and humiliation as a habit. I was told I was too emotional, too loud, too ambitious. I was asked to tone it down, to be softer, smaller, more palatable, until the day I was told to sleep on the couch. Gasps. Actual gasps. Eyes turned, some toward Ryan, others toward me. The room crackled with energy now, no longer silent, but electric. I didn't sleep on that couch, I said simply. Instead, I booked a $12,800 suite, not to be reckless, but to remember what it felt like to take up space, to be the main character in my own life again. That night changed everything. I let the words hang. You see, this isn't just a story about marriage. It's about how easily people can become ghosts in their own homes, how control often wears a smile, and how we teach people how to treat us by what we accept in silence. I paused. The room was still, breathless. But silence has left the building. Applause erupted. Not polite, not forced, genuine. Women clapped first, then the rest followed. Ryan didn't move. His date shifted uncomfortably beside him, her face pale. I stepped down from the stage and walked straight past him. He said nothing. He couldn't. What could he say that wouldn't confirm every word I had just delivered with fire and clarity? After the speeches, the music resumed, but the tone had changed. People approached me in waves, some with tears, some with awe, some just to squeeze my hand. I hadn't just thrown an event. I had exposed a reality they didn't know they needed to see. Later that evening, as the ballroom emptied and the last toast was made, I stood again on the balcony outside, the lake shimmering beneath the moonlight. Holly joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "You did it?" she said. "No," I whispered. "I started it. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet." Ryan still had his lies, his whispers, his masks. But now, I had something more powerful than revenge through sabotage. I had truth. I had witnesses. And most importantly, I had myself, unfiltered, unapologetic, and finally free. And what I would do next would shake the rest of his foundation to the core. The morning after the gala, I woke up to over 30 unread messages and a dozen missed calls. Some were from friends and colleagues, others from numbers I didn't recognize. And several, far too many, were from Ryan. I didn't open any of his messages. I didn't need to. I already knew what he would say. He would spin it, as always. Call me vindictive. Tell me I had ruined his reputation. He'd say I overreacted, that I'd made something private into something public. But the truth is, the second he told me to sleep on the couch, he had made our relationship a performance. I had simply decided to change the script. Over the next few days, the energy around me shifted. I wasn't just getting calls for events. I was getting invitations to speak. Women's groups, nonprofit leadership panels, even a podcast about rebuilding confidence after emotional trauma. I hadn't set out to become a voice for anyone but myself, but apparently, my story had struck a nerve. It wasn't about the hotel suite. It was about what it represented. A refusal to accept crumbs in a world where I had been taught to be grateful for any attention at all. I moved out of our home completely. Holly and I rented a loft downtown, above a coffee shop that made the best lavender lattes in the state. The space had brick walls and a rooftop garden, and it smelled like sunlight and second chances. I filled it with plants, music, candles, and books I had forgotten I once loved. I began writing again, journaling every night. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, but I knew it was mine. Ryan, of course, didn't give up easily. 1 week after the gala, he showed up at my office unannounced. I was reviewing final details for an upcoming engagement party when I saw him standing in the doorway, arms crossed. That familiar tight smile stretched across his face. "Megan," he said, as if nothing had happened, as if we were still married, as if I hadn't exposed him in front of 200 people. "I don't have time for this," I said, barely glancing up from my notes. "You humiliated me," he said flatly, "in public. And you tried to erase me," I replied, finally meeting his eyes. "In private," he stepped closer. "What are you even trying to prove? That you're some kind of martyr?" I stood, not because I felt threatened, but because I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. "No," I said. "I'm not a martyr. I'm a survivor. There's a difference." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "There it is," I said quietly. "The word you always use when you don't want to be held accountable." He looked like he might say more, but instead, he turned and walked out. No apology, no closure, just the sound of his shoes echoing down the hallway, growing fainter with every step. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary, like closing a book I should have stopped reading years ago. But there was still more to do. After the gala, more women reached out. Some had dated Ryan in college. Others had worked with him professionally. One was a woman named Elise, who had once interned at his firm. She told me how he'd flirted inappropriately, then turned hostile when she didn't reciprocate. Another, Sandra, had dated him years before me and left after he tried to isolate her from her family. Different women, different stories, but always the same tactics: charm, control, and punishment for independence. With their permission, I began documenting everything. I didn't want revenge in the petty sense. I didn't want to slash tires or hack emails. I wanted him held accountable. I wanted the truth exposed in a way he couldn't twist. So I began speaking publicly, carefully, authentically. I never used his full name. I never stooped to insults. I just told the truth. At first, people doubted. He had cultivated an image of being the golden boy, the guy who donated to charities, who showed up to fundraisers in tailored suits, who smiled for the camera like he had nothing to hide. But slowly, cracks formed. Clients started pulling back. A news blog picked up one of the podcast episodes I'd appeared on. Then another publication contacted me for an interview. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid for myself, but because I knew how far he was willing to go to preserve his image. Still, I agreed. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because silence protects abusers, and I was done being silent. The article dropped on a Thursday morning. It didn't name him directly, but it didn't need to. People in Erie talk. They knew. And the response was staggering. I received hundreds of messages, some full of support, some sharing their own stories, and a few accusing me of exaggeration. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how many women said the same thing. "Your story gave me the courage to leave. I saw myself in your words. I thought I was crazy until I heard you." That's when I realized I had already won. Because real revenge isn't just about making someone pay. It's about making sure no one else has to suffer the same thing you did. One night, a few months later, I was walking through the local market when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. One of Ryan's old co-workers, a man named Derek. He looked uncomfortable at first, like he didn't know whether to speak or not. But then he said something I'll never forget. "You know," he said, "I used to think Ryan was just intense, like passionate, but after reading everything, I think we all ignored the signs. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, and thank you." It hit me harder than I expected, not because I needed validation, but because it meant the story had worked, not just as a catharsis, but as a wake-up call. I walked home that evening with groceries in one hand and my head held higher than ever. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I chose to do with it. I eventually finalized the divorce. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't fight it. I think he knew the damage was already done. His image had shifted. His allies had dwindled. And I had emerged, not as his ex-wife, but as someone far more powerful. A woman who walked through fire and came out forged. In the months that followed, my business grew faster than I imagined. People trusted me, not just with their events, but with their stories. I built a new network, one based on authenticity and mutual respect. I hired more women. I mentored them. I made sure they knew what manipulation looked like in real time, and how to stand tall before it turned into something harder to escape. My life wasn't perfect. Healing isn't linear. Some nights, I still flinched at small sounds, still questioned myself, still replayed conversations I'd once brushed off, but I was no longer ashamed of that. I had earned every scar, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, because I had chosen to stay when it was hard, and I had chosen to leave when it was harder. And that choice, above all, is what saved me. Months had passed since the night I stood on that stage and spoke my truth. Life had moved forward in a way that felt almost surreal. My name was now tied not only to successful galas and elegant fundraisers, but to something far more powerful. A message. A movement. I hadn't planned for that when I left home with just a weekender bag. I had only wanted space. A breath. A moment of clarity. What I got instead was a second life. One built on foundations I poured myself. Still, there were days when the past clawed at the edges of my progress. And it came back full force the morning I opened my inbox to find a message I hadn't expected. It was from a young journalist named Ava McLean, someone I had once mentored during her internship at a local media outlet. She now worked for a national publication and had been following my story quietly, watching how it unfolded across platforms, whispered circles, and growing public interest. Her email was short but packed with weight. "I'm writing a feature about the invisible power of emotional abuse in high-functioning relationships. I want to include your story, not just as a sidebar, but as the centerpiece. Would you be open to it?" I sat there staring at the screen for several minutes. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I had already exposed more than I ever thought I would. But this would make it national. It would strip away any remaining ambiguity. There would be no more pretending, not for Ryan, and not for anyone who still thought of him as a charming, misunderstood man who had simply lost his wife to some overreaction. I said yes. Ava flew in from New York the following week. We met at a quiet cafe in the art district, the kind of place with worn brick walls and string lights that made everything feel intimate. She brought a recorder, a notepad, and eyes that burned with both curiosity and compassion. I told her everything, from the early days, to the subtle digs, to the night I booked that hotel suite, and the unraveling that followed. She asked thoughtful questions. She didn't interrupt, and when I finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You don't know how many people this is going to help," she said. The article went live 2 weeks later. The headline hit like a lightning bolt. Told to sleep on the couch, she booked a $12,800 hotel suite instead, and rebuilt her life from the top floor down. It was bold, visceral, exactly the kind of title that would catch fire. And it did. Within hours, the piece was shared thousands of times. Emails flooded my inbox, some from survivors, some from complete strangers who had never experienced abuse but found themselves reevaluating their relationships. The impact was undeniable, and somewhere in the noise, I knew Ryan had seen it too. He wouldn't be able to avoid it. Not this time. I had taken my pain and wrapped it in the truth, and now it was being passed hand to hand, voice to voice, around the country. But what I didn't expect was the lawsuit. 2 weeks after the article dropped, I was served. A defamation suit, filed by Ryan's attorney. It was bold, desperate, a move straight out of his old playbook. Make noise, create fear, reclaim control. At first, the panic rose in me like floodwater. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the legal papers, my heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear Holly's voice when she asked what was wrong. But then something strange happened. The fear burned out, fast, replaced by something far colder, sharper. The kind of clarity you only get when you've been burned before and lived to tell about it. I hired a lawyer, a fierce, brilliant woman named Katrina who had handled cases just like this. She reviewed the claim, raised an eyebrow, and said, "This isn't about defamation. This is about intimidation. He's trying to scare you back into silence." I nodded. It won't work. The lawsuit gave me something I didn't realize I needed. Finality. There it was. His last desperate attempt to drag me back into his orbit. But this time, I had backup. I had evidence. I had witnesses. And I had built something far bigger than either of us. Katrina filed a counterclaim, and that's when the press got wind of it. Suddenly, the headlines flipped. Financial advisor files lawsuit against ex-wife after abuse allegations. She fires back with proof. The story exploded again. This time, I didn't flinch. I showed up. I released statements. I stood in front of cameras and talked calmly about what it means to speak up even when you're afraid. And women kept writing, kept standing up, kept echoing what I had started. Ryan went quiet. Not the fake, brooding silence he used to punish me with, but a real silence. The kind that comes when someone realizes the tide has fully turned. His firm put him on leave pending internal review. Sponsors backed out. The polished mask he wore for so long began to crack in public. The legal battle didn't last long. Katrina was right. It was a hollow suit. It collapsed under its own weight when we presented documentation, testimony, and a detailed timeline that matched too cleanly with other women's accounts. The judge dismissed his claim. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps with Holly and Katrina beside me. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But I didn't say much. Just smiled. Not out of arrogance, but relief. I had survived something that wanted to erase me, and now I stood fully seen. That night I returned to the rooftop of my loft. The city lights shimmered below like scattered gold coins. The wind was crisp, carrying with it the scent of something new, possibility. I poured a glass of wine and curled into the corner of my outdoor sofa, wrapped in a soft throw, legs tucked beneath me, and I cried, not from pain, but from release, from gratitude, from the stunning realization that I had done the one thing he thought I never could. I had chosen myself. In every moment he tried to diminish me, I rose. In every insult disguised as advice, I rewrote the narrative. And when he told me I wasn't enough, I booked a suite, built a movement, and burned the script he tried to write for me. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calculated, quiet, unfolding in rooms he wasn't invited into. And in the end, it was the truth, not anger, that undid him. The very thing he feared most, that I would stop hiding, and I had. 6 months later, I walked into the same hotel lobby where everything had started. The marble floors gleaming, the warm lights casting golden reflections across the high ceilings. The Whitmore Grand had become more than a hotel to me. It was a symbol of defiance, of self-worth rediscovered, of a moment when I chose to stop shrinking. I was back now, not as a guest seeking refuge, but as the keynote speaker for a women's leadership summit. The invitation had come from the event director, who'd read about my story and insisted I was exactly who their audience needed to hear from. I accepted without hesitation, not because I needed the attention, but because I finally felt I had something to say, and the voice to say it without trembling. The suite they gave me this time was even more extravagant than the last, though I hadn't asked for it. Word had traveled through circles, and apparently my name carried weight now. It felt strange, surreal even, to realize how far I had come. The woman who once tiptoed through her own house to avoid conflict now stood in designer heels behind microphones, mentoring others to recognize their own power. I still had moments of disbelief, quiet nights when I'd reread journal entries from the early days and remember how close I was to staying silent forever. But those moments were fewer now, like ghost echoes in a room filled with music. Before the summit began, I spent the afternoon preparing in silence. I read through my notes, not to memorize, but to center myself. I didn't want to speak from a script. I wanted to speak from truth. And that night, when I walked on stage in front of hundreds of women, executives, survivors, students, mothers, I spoke the way I wish someone had spoken to me years ago. I told them that sometimes abuse doesn't come with bruises, that sometimes it comes in soft tones and clever smiles, that sometimes the person who hurts you most is the one who claims to love you best. I spoke of the couch, of the hotel suite, of the fire that woke up in me the moment I realized I didn't have to ask permission to exist fully. I told them about how I was called dramatic, emotional, unstable, and how I wore every one of those labels now with pride, because they came from refusing to be controlled. I didn't talk about Ryan by name. I never did, because it was never just about him. It was about every version of him that existed in other homes, other relationships, other silent lives. I saw women in the audience wipe tears as I spoke, saw heads nod, hands clutch hearts, and when the room rose in applause, I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that I had done something that mattered. After the event, dozens of women came up to me. Some hugged me. Some could barely speak. One handed me a letter, saying she hadn't had the courage to tell her story out loud, but hearing mine gave her hope that she someday could. I kept that letter in my purse. I read it on the flight home. It said simply, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." Life after Ryan wasn't just better. It was real, authentic. Some days were still hard. I had to relearn how to trust, how to feel safe in spaces I used to associate with fear. I built new relationships slowly, carefully. Holly and I grew closer than I ever imagined. She wasn't just my assistant anymore. She was my sister in survival. She knew when I needed quiet, when I needed coffee, and when I needed a push. My family, who had once quietly watched from the sidelines, now spoke openly about what they had suspected but hadn't known how to help with. My sister, Claire, apologized once through tears, saying, "I just thought you were tired all the time. I didn't realize you were disappearing." I told her it wasn't her fault, that abusers are skilled at making their victims invisible to everyone except them, that the best thing she could do now was see me clearly. And she did, more than anyone ever had. Financially, I had rebuilt everything. The business had doubled in revenue. I'd expanded to events in other cities. I was asked to consult on campaigns, nonprofit launches, and women-led brand events. But more than that, I'd started a foundation, a quiet one at first, nothing flashy, just a fund to help women leave unhealthy relationships, providing short-term housing, therapy sessions, legal assistance. It was the thing I wished had existed when I was standing in that driveway at midnight, unsure of where to go or what to do next. Eventually, I bought my own home. Not a mansion, not a penthouse. A small 2-bedroom cottage tucked near the lake. It had ivy along the porch railings and creaked when you walked down the hallway. But it was mine. The keys jingled like freedom when I opened the door for the first time. I painted the kitchen yellow, filled the rooms with art. Adopted a dog, Milo, a rescue with nervous eyes and a heart that healed slowly, like mine. And I dated. Slowly. Carefully. At first, I questioned everything. Was this gesture kind or controlling? Was this silence peaceful or passive-aggressive? But eventually, I met someone who didn't just tolerate my fire. He respected it. His name was Daniel, a graphic designer who listened more than he spoke and never flinched when I asked hard questions. I didn't rush. I told him my story on our 4th date, and he didn't look away. He just said, "Thank you for trusting me," and that was enough. He didn't fix me. He didn't need to. I wasn't broken. I was healing. Years from now, when I look back on the night I was told to sleep on the couch, I won't remember it with bitterness. I'll remember it as the last time I ever let someone decide how small I should be. I'll remember it as the moment I stepped into the unknown and found not fear, but fire. I'll remember it as the night I didn't just leave a house. I left a version of myself behind and chose someone stronger instead. There will always be those who say I was dramatic, that I overreacted, that I should have kept it private. But I didn't build a new life to make them comfortable. I built it to breathe, to exist, to thrive. And no matter what comes next, I know I will never again apologize for my voice, my strength, or my refusal to be silenced. My name is Megan Foster. I am 32 years old, and I was told to sleep on the couch. But instead, I booked a $2,800 hotel suite. And then, I rebuilt an empire on everything they said I wasn't allowed to be. 2 years later, on a crisp fall afternoon in Erie, I stood at the edge of the lake behind my cottage, barefoot on the cool grass, watching golden leaves dance on the surface of the water. It was the kind of afternoon that made you breathe a little deeper, the kind that whispered peace into your bones. Milo ran in wide circles behind me, barking into the wind, chasing nothing and everything at once. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the silence settle. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory, full of purpose, full of every hard-earned inch I had fought for and won. My life looked nothing like it had the night I was told to sleep on the couch. That version of Megan, the one who whispered instead of spoke, who waited for permission to exist, felt like a ghost I had finally learned how to bury. Not with rage, not even with sadness, but with forgiveness. Not for Ryan. I never gave him that, and I didn't owe it to him. But for myself. I forgave myself for staying, for shrinking, for hoping for change that never came. Forgiveness, I learned, is less about letting them off the hook and more about untying yourself from the weight of their choices. My foundation, Reclaim Her, had grown beyond anything I imagined. It started as a small fund, quietly supporting women through the earliest, hardest stages of leaving. But word spread. More survivors shared their stories. More donors reached out. We expanded to offer housing, career training, and legal assistance. And last spring, we opened our first physical center in Pittsburgh, a beautiful, restored building with wide windows and a garden out back where women could sit, talk, cry, and dream again. I visited often, not as a leader or a founder, but as a reminder. I sat in circles, shared my story again and again, not because I enjoyed retelling it, but because sometimes healing begins when you hear someone else say, "Me too." The women I met there weren't broken. They were burning with the same fire I had once carried quietly, and watching them take their first steps toward freedom reminded me of who I had once been, frightened but brave, uncertain but determined. Daniel was still by my side. We hadn't rushed into anything. We didn't need to. Our relationship was built slowly, carefully, like a house made of glass and honesty. He never tried to fix me, never tried to mute me. He simply held space for me to grow into whoever I needed to become. And I did the same for him. We were two whole people choosing each other, not out of need, but out of truth. He proposed on the roof of our favorite bookstore one evening in May, with no crowd, no cameras, no grand gestures. Just a simple ring, a quiet question, and the kind of look that says, "I see you, exactly as you are, and I want this forever." I said yes. Not because I needed a partner to feel complete, but because I wanted to walk this life beside someone who never asked me to dim my light. The wedding was small, 20 guests, barefoot in a field behind my cottage. Milo carried the rings tied loosely around his neck. Holly officiated, and instead of vows written on paper, Daniel and I whispered them into each other's hands, promises made between us alone. There was laughter, there were tears, and when the music played, I danced with my entire body, free of shame, of hesitation, of weight. Ryan never resurfaced. After the lawsuit collapsed and the story faded from the news cycle, he disappeared from my orbit completely. Last I heard, he'd moved out west, started over somewhere with a new job, a new narrative, maybe a new version of himself. I didn't follow. I didn't care. His story wasn't mine to carry anymore. And if he ever tried to rewrite history again, there was a long, loud record of truth ready to rise and meet him. What mattered most wasn't that he was gone. It was that I no longer felt the need to look over my shoulder. He didn't haunt me. He didn't get to define even one corner of my joy. And that, more than any headline, any lawsuit, any applause, was the real victory. I started writing again, not just in journals or speeches, but a book. It began as memoir, but grew into something more, a guide, a roadmap, a love letter to the women still standing at the edge, unsure if they can jump. It was called The Sweet Life, How I Took My Power Back. One night, one choice, one step at a time. It became a bestseller within months, not because I was famous, but because the truth resonates, and women all over the world were hungry for it, for a story that didn't end with pain, but with power. One letter in particular arrived on a rainy morning. No return address, just my name, written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, neat, careful. It said, "I watched you from the sidelines, silent, afraid. I thought if I waited long enough, things would get better. But they didn't. They only got smaller. Then I read your story, and something in me cracked open. I left. I have nothing yet, but I have peace. And I wanted you to know, you saved me. Without ever meeting me, you saved me." I cried for an hour, not because I needed to be seen, but because I had become the person I once needed so badly to find. In the quiet, in the spaces between chaos and calm, I had built a life layered with meaning. I planted herbs in the garden every spring. I took long walks without checking my phone. I learned to say no without apology. I laughed loudly, even when it startled people. I wore what I wanted. I loved who I chose. I surrounded myself with people who poured into me, not drained me. And I stopped apologizing for every single breath I took. Every now and then, I would return to the Whitmore, not for the memories, but for the reminder. I'd walk past the desk, up the elevator, and stand on the balcony where the first ember of my freedom was lit. I'd close my eyes and remember that version of myself, the one who stood barefoot, sleepless, scared but strong, and I'd whisper, "Thank you." Because that woman didn't fall apart. She rose. And because of her, I got to live this life now. The world didn't change because I told my story, but mine did. And for every woman who finds herself at the edge of silence, wondering if her voice matters, I offer this. It does. For every time you were told to be smaller, softer, quieter, more agreeable, this is your permission to be loud, to take up space, to build something massive from the ruins of what tried to break you. You are not too much. You are enough. And if they ever tell you to sleep on the couch, you have every right to book the suite. Because your story isn't over. It's only just beginning. Have you ever had to reclaim your identity after years of being told you were too much, too emotional, or not enough? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to hear your voice. And if this story reminded you of something you've lived through, please like and subscribe for more stories of courage, healing, and rising from silence. Send this video to someone who needs to remember their worth. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen. And sometimes walking away is not a failure. It's the first step toward freedom. Thank you for listening to my story.